President Holland is married to his high school sweetheart, also from St. George, the former Patricia Terry. They are the parents of 3 children, Matthew, Mary Alice, and David, and Matthew is presently serving a mission in Scotland. With that brief introduction, it is such a pleasure to welcome our Chief Executive Officer onto our campus and to turn the time over to him.
Thank you very, very much, President Wade. Aloha. It's fun to be with you, and a treat that has nothing at all to do with a football game, I promise. We had to make this trip anyway. We just arranged to make it at a convenient weekend, I guess. And I am excited about the girls' volleyball team. Our girls' volleyball team in Provo, for a few days, is ranked #1 in the nation. Now, depending on how the next game or two goes, we might not be able to retain that, but girls' volleyball everywhere is on the rise, and we're going to be interested in you and supporting you and cheering for you as you make that significant mark over here. So to men's and women's athletics, along with all else that we do at the university, we commend you and applaud you for that. I talk about athletics primarily for Brother Roger's sake. He's so keen on these areas of athletic activity, and I want him to know that we're not sliding them at the university and trying to move ahead in a strong way. That beautiful, beautiful choral piece from Jim Smith and the community and the university, that was absolutely stunning. Dottie, you sing as beautifully as you ever did. Dottie Baleen was my wife's counselor in the Relief Society president at BYU. I won't say how many years ago, but a few, just a few. And Dottie and all of the rest of you, Ruth Ann raised me and Pat as our childhood friend in St. George, these many years ago. And it's just fun to look at that group and to see the faces and the friends and the love that you communicate through that beautiful music. When is this concert, Jim? When is the Christmas time, I guess? December 7th. There was another December 7th over here. You've thought about that, okay? Okay. You won't bomb out, as it were. Yeah, okay. It's okay. It's all right. The talk will pick up from here. Actually, that piece just gives me one springboard to my chat with you, my discussion, and I'm honored to be here in the presence of especially my wife, Pat, who gives me my courage and my hope and my faith and my strength, my immediate colleagues from Provo, President Rogers from the Center, and President Haycock from the Temple, and all of their associates in the wider circle in this community. President Romney once, some of you, at least some of the faculty and staff, those in the community will remember President Romney years ago talking about Laie as a living laboratory. That's a great phrase, and it sort of trips off the tongue, and it's one that I've liked. In terms of an LDS experiment, there aren't very many places in the world left, and I include in that Salt Lake City. There aren't very many places in the world left where we have enough of our own number in a reasonably confined and definable circle that lets us experiment, lab-like, living laboratory-like, that lets us experiment with these concepts of Zion. People from all over the world, in your case literally, 32 or 35 cultures and 20 languages. I mean, we have some common things bringing us together in Provo, but nothing like that complexity per capita that you have in Laie with a temple and the university and the center and a larger community and some chance to kind of see what it means to live together and to be whatever the Lord intended us to be. And that has some challenges, and you know about those, and we have them in our life, and you have them in yours. But let me just encourage you in that idea of shared, common, Latter-day Saint life together with all of the complexity that could, I suppose, be designed if we set out together to design a global village, at least for the church, Laie would come as close to it as we have left. It is an extension of what Kirtland and Nauvoo and the Salt Lake Valley and some of those special colonies in Mexico and Canada were once. But Laie really is almost the only one left, with those marvelous jewels glistening in the center and all these remarkable people from so many lands and places and cultures and languages coming together to try to make that work. For whatever the challenge and the difficulty, I'm grateful that we're together today in a common devotional for that purpose. I come with the blessing of our Board of Trustees, who are made up of the First Presidency of the Church and most of the members of the 12. And Elder Marvin J. Ashton specifically asked me to bring you his love. I left him 20 minutes before my plane was taxiing down the runway in a meeting to expressly bring you his love and devotion and appreciation, as he has had over the past few years so very much to do with our common activities here in Laie. So we extend that love to you and to our administrative associates here who are so universally loved and admired. I want to pick up off of that musical performance that Brother Smith provided, including that exhilarating opening hymn. I sort of thought somebody had shifted into overdrive there somewhere in that third hymn, or that third verse. That was spectacular. But some of you will know Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. It'll have to rank among the half dozen loveliest, most beautiful pieces of music ever written. But there is a sequence, some bars toward the end of that piece, where it's all sort of lofty and trebly and up high and nice, and the basses don't have anything to do. And in this symphonic orchestra, who fouled up their calendaring, and on a mainland tour, they should have been in Minnesota in August. They ended up in Tucson, Arizona in August. It was miserably hot. It was absolutely suffocating. It was a non-member group. And after a couple of nights of just unbearable life in this performance, these basses that didn't have a lot to do at the end of that piece decided that they would slip out for a little refreshment, so to speak. It wasn't Fresca or Hires root beer. But they didn't want the maestro to get to the end of the piece without them. So one absolutely brilliant musician runs up before the performance to the maestro's stand, takes the score, ties the last page, takes a little piece of string, ties the last page to the hard cover so that the maestro can't turn and finish without them. Really a brilliant fellow. So they know that they're safe, and the rest of their teammates can't get to the finish before them, and they leave to get a little refreshment. They stay longer than they should have, and they drink a lot more than they might have, and they're soused, and are late, and fighting their way back to the auditorium, trying to come in unobtrusively at the back of the stage, tipping over chairs, knocking down little sort of dividers and partitions, and upsetting people. And right at that moment, the maestro is trying to turn said fastened page of the music and can't, and is jiggling and joggling and tugging, and then his stand falls over and the baton drops and the music's all over the floor, and two of the first violins, very high-strung people here on the front row, that'll come to you in a minute, two of the first violins pass out, collapse, and the whole thing is coming undone with this magnificent piece of music, now remarkably tormented and tortured. If you will, freeze with me at that moment, on that scene, and consider the feelings of that maestro when he realized there were two out in the last of the ninth. The score was tied, and the bases were loaded. That really does have something to do with what I want to talk about. but it'll take you a while to get there. I need to insert quickly with that sort of hesitant applause you gave. I'm not going to work any miracles here for you. I have no higher hope. I have no higher hope after this next 25 minutes than that you will say of me, as was said of the cross-eyed javelin thrower. He didn't set any records, but at least he kept the crowd alert. And on that spirit, I plead with you to stay with me for 25 minutes while I talk about the last of the ninth. World Series, Bruce Hurst, a lot of good reasons for us, Ray Knight for that matter, to use that little metaphor for our combined devotional, PCC and BYU Hawaii, and all of President Haycock's people and anybody else that's present. I'll address, as it were, the students, but I do invite all of us, PCC colleagues and administrative associates and others, to listen on those kinds of decisions that come along. I don't know whether you watch the World Series or not, but there are some interesting and crucial and sometimes fatal decisions that are made as the course of life, or the course of, in this case, a game, goes along. And do you pull the pitcher or don't you, or do you send in a pinch hitter or don't you, or which pitcher do you send in if you're going to substitute, and on and on and on. And it's in that spirit that I want to talk about where you are now in your life as you start to come to what I think is the most condensed, the most critical decision-making period you will ever have in your life. Now, I do not mean that you haven't made some important decisions already, and you will evermore, forever make important decisions. But if you had to freeze frame, like I did with the maestro on the stand, if you had to identify and collapse and bracket, what, 6 years, 5 or 6 or 7, or 10 if you wanted to be really generous, or whatever, pick a number, but you're in it, of the most crucial time, I think, in your life in terms of long-range, far-reaching, eternity-affecting choices about school, about friends and friends that lead to marriage, and professions, and the choice of your world's work, and where you live, and certainly, in large measure, how you live. There's not much your parents can or maybe choose to direct you in much anymore. They'll always love you, and they'll always advise you and always pray for you, but it's one thing to be 8, and it's another thing to be 18. And you can't separate those. None of us live in little categorized, dry pack, sealed containers. What you did 10 years ago will matter in every sense that what you do 10 years from now will matter. But you're really getting a sort of an intense education in decision-making and the pursuit of choices and the eternal implication of almost everyday experience in downtown Laie. Does Laie have a downtown? I guess it does. In that spirit, let me read you some very, very heavy philosophy. It is weighty stuff. I don't know whether you can handle it here at 11 o'clock in the morning, but let's try. If you've had breakfast, maybe you can. It's from that remarkable philosopher, German in origin, Dr. Seuss. Did I ever tell you about the young Zode who came to 2 signs at the fork of a road? One said to place 1 and the other place 2. So that there's a real danger in waiting to live, waiting until you're out of school. You know, life's really going to start for me when I get my degree. Or life's really going to start when I get married. or when we have a family, or when the family's grown up and gone, or when we've got a home, or when we've got the home paid for. Well, if you wait for all of that, you're going to wait forever. And life really has to be lived every day in every way right where you are. I'm sort of pleading with you to grow where you're planted. Wherever you are in that little garden of life, just give it your best shot. And don't somehow assume that, well, when I get big and when I grow up and when, that somewhere down this road and beyond that turn and over that mountain, that must be where the end of the rainbow is. You and I know rainbows enough on this island to know that you could chase those forever and forever and never find them. Never come to what you thought was your grand and glorious and personal pot of gold. Personally or professionally or morally or any other way. We just all have to kind of do everything we can right now, in this place, at this time, in the assignment we've been given. And I want to give you 3 steps to do that. And if it's convenient, I'll come back and finish the Zode story in a minute. I want to give you 3 steps to do that. Number 1, take advantage of this day. You can spend your entire life lamenting about yesterday, and you can spend your whole life frustrating and fretting about tomorrow. And you can't do anything really about either one except as you seize these hours, this day, the day that the Lord's given you. And I just ask you to drive the deepest stake and fly the highest flag you can fly in the time you've been given, in the location that's yours, and it may or may not be of your choosing. And there can be a lot of anxiety about this. There can be a lot of anxiety about the future. And we all have some sort of remorse or, reluctance about the past. That's just sort of how life is. It seems to me, even as I look at this audience, if you're from Hong Kong, I don't know. What does it mean if the land reverts back to communist rule? That's probably a little anxious for Hong Kong students and Hong Kong families. If you're from Taiwan, you've probably lived with some of that anxiety. And if you're from the PCC, that's a whole new world opening up to you, a whole view of the West that hasn't been experienced or enjoyed there for a half a century or a quarter of a century. If you're from the Philippines, what does it mean for the direction those islands will now go with Mrs. Aquino, or what will happen if Mr. Marcos wants to go back or try? You could just extrapolate from that, I suppose, and go through more or less every culture and every climate, and we do it on the mainland. We just had an election, and there are competing forces and high hopes and anxieties all over the world, in every life and in every family, and right down into our human heart. You somehow just have to take command of what you've been given and work within the hours that are yours and trust that the past and the present and the future will all unfold according to God's blessing for you as you try to live the gospel and do what you should. Let me use my first example. When the saints gathered in Kirtland, Ohio, the Lord almost immediately commanded them to build a temple. They didn't know what a temple was. It was sort of like Bill Cosby and the Ark. We hadn't had a temple in this dispensation, and they needed instruction. It wasn't lavish. It was 66 feet by 55 feet, and it just had a couple of stories. Maybe some of you have been to Kirtland, and it had one end for the Melchizedek priesthood, another end for the Aaronic priesthood, and it had a basic celestial design, but it was very modest. It cost $60,000 to build that temple. Just happened that they didn't have $60,000. But to us, that doesn't sound like very much, a century and a half later. But they gave everything for that. Right in the middle of the construction of that temple, their highest hope to get this house built unto the Lord, right in the middle of that, the trouble explodes in Missouri. And every able-bodied man in Missouri, in Kirtland heads for Missouri on Zion's camp and related tasks and assignments. The people who are left to build the temple in Kirtland are old men and whatever women could serve, and children. There's a line from Heber C. Kimball's journal which says, "Our women engaged in knitting and spinning in order to clothe those men who are laboring on that building. The Lord only knows the scenes of poverty and tribulation and distress which we passed through to accomplish that task." Well, to accomplish it for what purpose? To walk away from it. To turn away and leave it in the hands of apostates and excommunicants, and to have it lost to the church to this very day. A great big sort of goose egg on the scoreboard of life in the ninth inning, as it were, when we thought we sort of needed to come through and win the game, and it looks like we lost it. Well, they leave and go through Missouri and back and end up in Nauvoo, and the Lord says, well, gosh, we ought to build another temple. Well, Kirtland's fairly recent in their memory, but they say, look, Nauvoo's a new situation. Nobody wants this land. Nobody's going to drive us out. We've got a lot of things sort of organized and put together here, and we'll go ahead and build a new temple in Nauvoo. It's going to cost a little more, $1 million this time. It's going to take a lot more labor, and it'll be 5 years rather than the about 2 that it took to build in Kirtland. It is a major project of real magnitude, larger structure, and more magnificent. And what's the final result of the Nauvoo temple experience? Joseph and Hiram are dead. They're lying in state in the old Hamilton Hotel across the street from the Carthage jail, and that temple isn't even up to the square. And those families weep, and those widows wail, and those children wonder where their fathers are. And before that temple is even remotely finished, those driven Latter-day Saints are starting to be strewn out across the plains of Iowa with those wagons and carts and dugouts and anything else they can do to survive an absolutely horrible winter, and then find their way somewhere to the west, who knows where. And that temple, as you know, also falling into the hands of the enemies of the church, burned and desecrated and no longer there. Well, it isn't very many years later, it's only 2 or 3, that they get to the Salt Lake Valley, and the Lord says, well, I guess we'll build a temple. And, you know, I don't know how many times you have to do this. We can be slow learners, but we can learn. And I think a lot of folks were saying, let's just stop and think about this for a minute. Maybe temples aren't such a great idea. You know, we've tried it twice, and the track record is impossible. It's hopeless. And we've given everything we have, not only our labor and our hands and our china and our silver and everything we own, but we've given our hearts, we've given our souls. And it's been rejected, it's been abused, it's been desecrated. Maybe we ought not to build a temple. President Young, and this was his reply. As he stood and marked the site where the Salt Lake Temple would be and is now standing, but a lot of dissenters in the very circle that gathered to break that ground. This was his reply. Some have inquired, do you suppose we'll finish the temple, Brother Brigham? There's a little cynicism dripping on that question. They're quite sure they won't finish the temple. This is just going to be one of a series of heartbreaks. Expensive, tragic, ecclesiastical heartbreaks. Some will inquire, do you suppose we'll finish the temple, Brother Brigham? I've had such questions put to me already, he says. My answer is, I don't know. Hardly the wealth of reassurance they were searching for. My answer is, I don't know whether we'll finish the temple, and I do not care. I have never cared but for one thing, and that is simply to know that I am now this hour right before my Father in heaven. If I am this moment, this day, doing the things God requires of my hand and precisely where my Father in heaven wants me to be, I care no more about tomorrow than though it would never come. I don't know where I'll be tomorrow. nor do I know when this temple shall be done. But this I do know, there should be a temple built here. This I do know, it is the duty of this people to commence. $4 million and 40 years later, we have that remarkable, eternal, granite symbol of Latter-day Saint perseverance and a link between heaven and earth, a symbol now spread throughout the world, no more beautiful example of which than exists in this community, about where heaven and earth touch and the veil is thinnest of all in all of our mortal experience. But a time or two in my life, I have needed some fraction. None of us maybe. Certainly I don't rise to the Brigham Young level of commitment and conviction. But a time or two in my life, and maybe in yours, you're going to have to just say, I don't know about tomorrow. I don't know where I'll be tomorrow, or whether tomorrow will even come. But you can know where you ought to be, doing what you ought to do this very hour, this day, this moment. And maybe if we can do that, the tomorrows and the tomorrows and the tomorrows really do take care of themselves. We ought not to live without vision. We ought not to live without dreams. We ought to have hopes and ideas about where we're going. But this moment, this hour, this semester, and this day's work at the center, and this endowment session at the temple, those are the things we can affect. Those are the things that we can alter and improve and magnify. To somehow be totally debilitated by the circumstance out of which we've come, or the nebulous, hazy future into which we go, to just be catatonic about that, and therefore fail in the one moment we can improve, and the one hour we can seize, would be to play so totally into the hands of the adversary that we have people like President Young and all the other prophets and leaders and associates and colleagues who teach us and tell us to seize the day, to not worry after we've done the very best we can do, to not worry very much about tomorrow and let it take care of itself. In that same spirit, let me encourage you to rely totally and lovingly and blessedly on your Father in heaven, whose child you are, and to trust the way a child is entitled to trust in a parent who's older and wiser and has command of more resources and helps to get a child where that child, boy or girl, young man or young woman, needs to finally go. Let me just give an example, a story I think that's not commonly known, but it's a marvelous one that's somehow encouraged me and did encourage me when I heard it about you at about your age. On the 17th of May, 1884, on the 17th of May, that another temple story, that Logan Temple in Cache Valley in Utah was to be dedicated. It had been started in 1877, and there had been some difficulties and some challenges, and those were difficult times in the church, if you'll recall those years, and significant political and economic difficulties facing the church and the greater Utah territory. But they're still moving ahead to build this temple, this magnificent site in Logan, in whose shadow Brother Phil Smith and others grew up. Well, but on the 17th of May, it was to be dedicated, and they didn't have a president to name. Now, it's hard to run a temple if you don't have a president. Ask President Haycock and all that he has to do from morning till night. And the first presidency, John Taylor, George Buchanan, and Joseph F. Smith had ridden by buggy from Salt Lake to Logan and were staying in Logan that night, the night of the 16th, the night before, and still didn't have a president. They'd prayed about it. They'd worried about it. They knew the temple was being completed. They knew they had to have a president. It isn't as if they hadn't done what they thought they could do. I'm encouraging you that sometimes these sort of very needful answers don't seem to come so quick. Even when you think you're doing in the very hour what you're supposed to be doing. They were, and they could not somehow get a message as to who the president of the temple should be. And they drove in absolute sobriety and solitude to Logan to dedicate the temple with no one to announce, to preside over it. And they prayed through much of the night of the 16th, before the morning of the 17th, and got no answer. And went to the temple site, went to the temple building, the temple grounds, the morning of the 17th, and still did not have an answer. And they delayed the start of the service. People had gathered all over Cache Valley, all over northern Utah. People had gathered for this magnificent dedication of this holiest of edifice, a beauty and a splendor that we're still impressed by today, and pioneers must have been just overwhelmed by. They were all gathered in the room, and the brethren said, may we delay the start of the meeting just briefly? I mean, push had come to shove with no time left to do whatever it was they thought they were doing in righteousness. And those three, that first presidency, retired one more time. I don't know how many times they've prayed, but it's a lot of times now. So I'm pleading for your patience. I'm pleading for your willingness to let the Lord work on His timetable and not always on yours. Just as He will not always work on exactly the timetable the first presidency of the church might hope for. They retired, left a full congregation out in those buildings, and went into the vacant temple president's office, which office did not have a name on the door, and knelt again one more time and pled with the Lord, John Taylor, president of the church, as voice, as to whom the Lord would have be the president of the temple. This is the exact language. Lord, show unto us thy servants, after whatever introductory information he gave. Lord, show unto us thy servants, whom thou hast chosen to be the president of the Logan Temple. And as clearly as my voice comes to yours, as distinctly as if it were into a microphone in this hall, a voice responded and said, my servant Mariner W. Merrill. And John Taylor was so stunned, so nearly frightened, that he said, Lord, whom did thou say? And a second time, as clearly as you hear me, the voice came, my servant, Mariner W. Merrill. And they walked out and announced to the congregation and to Brother Merrill that he was going to be the president of the now newly dedicated Logan Temple. Why would the Lord do that? Why would He wait and wait and wait and wait to answer a prayer? Why would they have to go through all of that they've been through for months, and with horrible intensity now over the last few days, and absolute frenzy in the last few hours? Why would He do that? Why would He not tell you what tomorrow's going to be like, or next week, or next month, or whether the temple will ever really be built, Brigham? And if you've had a bad experience in Kirtland and Nauvoo, I mean, aren't we supposed to sort of rely on our own best judgment here and kind of think this thing through? And well, God's ways are not always our ways. And I think particularly at this time in your life, if you want to call it the educational years of your life, and again, I'm including the spirit of our work at the PCC in the temple and in the community and in the university, as well as our student life in the university. If you want to call these educational years, as surely they are for all of us, all the years that we are here, then let the teacher be the teacher. Let the professor control the class and manage the environment and teach you what it is he knows and that you don't. And it won't always seem or sound like you thought it would. And it won't always come at your wish And certainly it won't come at your wish, and it often, I guess, won't come at your absolute pleading, urgent command. But to live now and to push right up to the edge of the River Jordan. You remember that when they were carrying the Ark of the Covenant, they had to put their feet in the river before the river stopped and let them through. That's the smaller symbolic counterpart of the parting of the Red Sea just a few years earlier. That you've got Pharaoh and chariots behind you and an impassable sea in front of you, and you have to get right up to the edge. You have to get up to where the waves sort of lap around your sneakers before those seemingly impassable paths and passages open up to you. I don't know why that is, but I have found it so true, so often, so many ways, so many times in my own life. Probably to teach me, probably an exercise in faith, probably to say, are you really, really, truly willing to hang on and believe? Will you really take it right out to the end of the road where the light has stopped shining, 20 minutes ago? And still trust and still hope and still believe that these important choices you make, these challenges about missions and marriage and work and friends and employment and home country and politics and economics and paying next week's bills, grand scale or small, can we trust and stand firm and do our duty to start digging the dirt for that temple, even if it looks absolutely, absolutely hopeless? And all experience tells us that it probably is. Can we still move forward, get in the buggy and ride to Logan and know that someday, somewhere, somehow, before we get there, or at least by the final hour, surely we'll have a president, and trust that God will bless us like the children that we really are? And I believe that He'll take opportunity to remind us occasionally of that childhood and of that fatherhood. Let me close with one reminder about what you do in the meantime, while you're waiting. While you're waiting to be big, while you're waiting to grow up and have money and a home and a marriage and professional life and to be the president of the church. While you're waiting for all of that, there is one thing you have to do. There is one thing you have to do, and that is to live as a witness of the truth. You can't control all the politics in the world. You might not even be able to control your own economics. You may not be able to, I don't know whether you can even stay in school or keep the PCC functioning or keep people coming to the temple so that it's busy and full and saving the dead. I don't know how much of that you can control. But you personally can live as a witness of the truth. Which truth you have. Which truth I hope and I believe you know. Now let me put that in the language of one not of our faith, but who makes a wonderfully central LDS point, and with that I'll close. Is every Christian, just insert Latter-day Saint as our specific aspect of a Christian congregation today, is every Latter-day Saint expected to bear witness? A man or woman content to bear no witness to the truth is not of the kingdom of heaven. One who believes must bear witness. One who sees the truth must live testifying of it. So, is our life then a witness for the truth? Do we carry ourselves in the bank, on the farm, in the house or shop or school or chamber as the Lord would, or as the Lord would not? Are we, in fact, careful to be true? Or are we mean and self-serving and flattering slaves? When contempt is cast on the truth that we know, do we smile at that? When the truth is wronged in our presence, do we make any sign that we still believe? I do not say this blessed little minister of a century ago says, I do not say that we're called upon to dispute and argue with logic and reason and to make enemies. But we are called upon to show that we are on the side of truth. The soul that loves the truth, and this is the concluding sentence, the soul that loves the truth and tries to be true will know when to speak and when to be silent. What if the whole world were against you? All the political problems in Hong Kong and the PCC and Taiwan and the Philippines and the mainland all put together, and all the other countries you want to mix. What if the whole world were against you? The soul that loves the truth will know when to speak and when to be silent. But the true man will never look as if he did not care. May I just say that one more time? The true man will never look as if he did not care. We are not bound to say all we think, but we certainly are bound not to even look like what we do not think. Do you ever, in any setting, look or sound or appear or act unlike the truth, unlike what you know to be true? Is there a moment in your life, I ask it of me even as I ask it of you, are there times, are there places, are there conversations, are there communications, are there relationships in which you do not look or sound or act like the truth that you know to be eternally yours? You don't always have to be running around bearing your testimony. You don't have to be dropping on your knees to say prayers in public or private every 5 minutes to show everybody you're a Latter-day Saint. There are certain kinds of quiet things that we do that aren't very spectacular, that don't have to be defended with logic and argument and reason and some sort of confrontation, on a street corner in downtown Honolulu. Life will be a lot quieter, a lot plainer, a lot more everyday-like than that. But there is not a place, there isn't an hour, there isn't a moment where I think we could ever be justified in not looking like what we believe to be true, in not acting or sounding or speaking or serving in ways that are inconsistent with the conviction we have of the eternal gospel of Jesus Christ. That will be quietly done. It will be often privately done. Almost will never get the centerfold coverage of the church news. But it'll be the truth. It'll be your witness of the truth. Where you stand, where you are, wherever God and your personal pursuit in life has taken you, in whatever island or country or frontier that you find yourself, may be very private and very personal and very unspectacular, but it will be a declaration for the truth. It will be a witness of the restoration of the saving ordinances and principles of the gospel of Jesus Christ. I know of no higher challenge, I know of no more fundamental task in this world than to know the truth and to live it, as plainly and privately as that may be, but to never compromise. May God bless you in your patience with yourself and with others as we all strive to gain the faith and live the life that will make us worthy of the love of our Father in heaven, which love I express to you and for you personally in the name of Jesus Christ.